I'm Sue Romanoff, the head of healthcare content at Edison. Today, I have the pleasure of catching up with the CEO and CMO of Basilea. Welcome, David and Mark. Shall we kick off with a couple of questions?
Far away.
So David, Basilea is focused on the development of novel anti-infective therapies. Can you explain the areas of unmet medical need that you are addressing?
Yeah, I mean, our definition of anti-infectives is really, we want to treat serious bacterial and fungal infections. And so clearly in the antibacterial space, it's no secret that antimicrobial resistance to current treatments is building. It's an issue today. It's only going to increase as an issue going forward. So we're, with our current treatments and then with what we're looking to in-license and develop ourselves, we are looking to develop novel antibacterial compounds that really address antimicrobial resistance. So as such, we're addressing a real major unmet medical need, a global public health issue. In the antifungal space, that's quite interesting because with current treatments, the mortality, the morbidity is still very high in these invasive, serious fungal infections. And we've shown, without the introduction of Cresemba, our antifungal asset, that actually by addressing these unmet medical needs, you can really, the product is taken up globally in terms of the treatment of patients, but also in terms of generating meaningful revenues for Basilea. And so we believe by continuing to focus on the unmet medical needs in the antifungal area, like we've done with Cresemba, we will actually continue to address serious issues in the antifungal market.
Mark, let's get into some of the science here. You recently had some positive readout from Phase III ERADICATE. Can you give us an overview of the study, recent results, and maybe the next steps?
Oh, yes, sure. So ERADICATE was performed in a population of patients with complicated Staphylococcus aureus bacteraemia. And this is an area of high medical need. There are about 120,000 cases per year in the US with this disease. And this has quite high morbidity and significant mortality. And ERADICATE is the largest study to date in this area, performed for the registration of a novel antibiotic using a randomized design. 390 patients were randomized either to ceftobiprole or to daptomycin, and aztreonam could be added to daptomycin because daptomycin, unlike ceftobiprole, lacks gram-negative coverage. To be successful or to meet the primary endpoint in this study, patients have to achieve overall success, and this was defined at 70 days after randomization, included survival of the patients, but also symptom improvement, clearance of the Staph aureus from the blood, as well as no additional complications from the Staph aureus bacteraemia. And this primary endpoint was achieved by 69.8% in the ceftobiprole group compared to 68.7% in the daptomycin group. And the difference, the statistically adjusted difference was 2%. And then the confidence interval around this 2% difference was well within the predefined 15% non-inferiority margin. So the study clearly met its primary objective of non-inferiority versus daptomycin with or without aztreonam, and also met all the pre-specified secondary objectives. So where does this lead us? This was the last major data readout we needed to put our NDA together, and we are currently compiling an NDA that includes the ERADICATE study, but also the target study performed in acute bacterial skin and skin structure infections that we concluded in 2019. And we will also explore with FDA whether we could include a CABP or community-acquired bacterial pneumonia indications based on previous phase 3 data from a study conducted several years ago. And that study formed the basis for our approval in pneumonia in Europe. So this will be our next step, compiling an NDA, and we expect to submit around year-end 2022.
As you mentioned, ERADICATE is twinned with another phase 3 study target. Could you elaborate on the study and explain the strategy behind this double-barreled approach?
Yeah, sure. So the target study, as mentioned before, was in acute bacterial skin and skin structure infections, or ABSSSI. And we completed that study back in 2019 as the first cornerstone for our NDA submission. This study included 679 patients that were randomized to ceftobiprole or to vancomycin plus aztreonam, and it met its primary objective of early clinical response, which is the FDA-defined, per guidance defined endpoint. About 91% of the ceftobiprole-treated patients compared to 88% of the vancomycin and aztreonam-treated patients achieved this primary endpoint. So from a strategy perspective, we need two cross-supportive pivotal phase 3 study for the NDA. So that's why we conducted Target and Eradicate to achieve a registration for these two indications in the US. Both protocols were discussed with the FDA, and we have a kind of formal acknowledgement that FDA was approving these protocols through a special protocol assessment, or SPA. So the other component, and I mentioned this earlier, we will also be discussing with FDA whether they are open to include another indication into our NDA, which is in community-acquired bacterial pneumonia, and this would be based on a study that was conducted several years ago in this indication, a phase 3 study, a large phase 3 study. And this study actually formed the basis for the approval of ceftobiprole in pneumonia in Europe. With the SAB study, the ABSI study, potentially a pneumonia study, I think we cover a broad range of severe bacterial infections where there's a high medical need. So a typical patient for ceftobiprole, where we see that a patient would benefit from this drug or would be where this would be a really good option, is a patient that comes to the hospital with a severe infection and the clinician has a suspicion of Staphylococcus aureus. So that's kind of the positioning that we see for ceftobiprole. In terms of comparators or competitors, there are currently only 2 drugs approved in SAB that cover methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA, and this is vancomycin and daptomycin. Vancomycin, though, is not considered a drug of first choice for methicillin-susceptible Staph aureus, which is about, in the US, about half of the SAB cases that you would see. So vancomycin is considered to be associated with an inferior outcome when it comes to MSSA, so not optimal for many SAB patients. In addition, has a renal toxicity. And daptomycin, apart from lacking gram-negative coverage, is also not recommended to be used in patients with lung infections or pneumonia. Ceftobiprole itself is highly potent against both MSSA and MRSA, is not nephrotoxic, and is effective in lung infections or pneumonia, which is represented by the approval of this indication in Europe through 2 large phase 3 studies. And we believe that there is really a significant differentiation based on these key points and a couple of other points too.
If we take a step back, David, I mean, what are the next milestones investors should be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, first of all, in the anti-infective focus area for us, to build on what Mark was saying, the NDA submission of ceftobiprole for the US around the year end is obviously a key next major milestone. And then outside of the US, we have the recently launched China for Cresemba, for isavuconazole, our antifungal. That was recently launched with the oral formulation, and we recently gained the approval for the IV formulation. So our partner Pfizer will be launching the IV formulation in China very shortly. And then to add to China, there's also the Cresemba Japanese approval that we're expecting in the fourth quarter. And this is obviously very important because Cresemba is driving our revenues today. And by launching in two new, potentially very large markets like China and Japan, that will be very important. To sort of build on that, we're also looking to advance our current preclinical assets towards the clinic, our anti-infective assets. And then finally, in the anti-infective space, the other focus area for us, not so much exactly a milestone I could predict this very second, but we're actively looking to actually in-license clinical as well as preclinical anti-infective assets to complement our current pipeline. So they're the sort of focus areas and the milestones in anti-infectives. And then finally, obviously, with our announcement of our new strategy, we announced that we're looking to transact our oncology assets, and we're hoping to get closure on the oncology assets by the end of the year. That will benefit us in a number of ways. Two major ways. One is the fact that we'll then have some clarity on future value creation from the transactions we do in oncology, but also then we won't have any material costs related to oncology from the beginning of 2023, which will be a contributor along with the increasing cash generating revenues towards our sustainable profitability from 2023 onwards.
This was a very informative conversation. Thank you, David and Mark. Thank you for everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.